That story about the dance off is true, and it was here in Amsterdam 3 years ago. There's actually a video of it somewhere. I don't know where, but it exists. It was taken on a GoPro. So this actually, it's a nice place for me to be. The first talk I gave while a HashiCorp employee was on this stage 3 years ago. So it's really nice. And while I'm being a bit nostalgic, I decided to title this talk "Vault is For." And for those of you that are cool. It's called Vault Update because I didn't get a better title in time. So, the subtitle for this is Vault Update Mid-2019 Edition. I'm principal engineer at HashiCorp on the sort of vault and secure side of things. It's me. So, to kind of paraphrase from Led Zeppelin, 4 years gone. Year one. So just to set the stage here, I'm going to talk a little bit first about where Vault was, where it's been going, how we think about it. Because as you might imagine, over the last 4 years, how we think about Vault, how we develop Vault, what we do with Vault, has changed internally, right? We've gotten a better understanding of what people need, what people want, et cetera. And so I'm going to start off with sort of a retrospective before I talk about what's coming in the near term. So in year one, we were focused on basics, right? This is when Vault first came out. So the first thing that we had was encrypted KV pass-through. And those of you that have been around HashiCorp a long time might remember Atlas. And Atlas was this thing that sort of ran a lot of our tools together and provided this kind of unified UI. And there were a lot of reasons that we got rid of Atlas over time, and it sort of turned into what's now Terraform Enterprise. But customers were saying, what are you doing with our secrets? We're giving you our API tokens. Like, what are you doing with them? And we had to say, something secure. And so the first use case for Vault was to protect those secrets. It was backed by Consul, and Consul had KV, and we said, look, KV actually works really well for a lot of things, but we need to be able to encrypt it on the way in, so at rest it's encrypted. Decrypt it on the way out, we need to control who has access to these secrets. The next thing was leasing. So once we had access control, we had tokens, it had a validity period and so on, then it was, okay, what else can we do with this fact that we are now tracking time, right? So leasing. So we started out with like MySQL and Postgres, and you could say, I want to generate database credentials that are unique to me. I want Vault to revoke them after some period of time, and that will help me get to this sort of like zero trust model. And the final kind of basic thing that was started was encryption as a service. So that's our transit backend. One thing that I found really amusing about a month ago is MongoDB. They made a lot of headlines that said, we have a way to stop data breaches. And their way to stop data breaches is to encrypt fields instead of encrypting the whole database. We've been telling people this for 4 years, right? Transit is very, very fast, and people use it at scale all over, regardless of whatever database you're using, to encrypt the fields instead of encrypting just the overall structure at rest. Because if someone gets access to your database and they can just query what's in there and it's all unencrypted, they can still get everything. So this is something that we saw early on and we talked to people about. So that was kind of year one, was getting all the basics in, right? Tracking things and storing things and so on. Year two is about scaling. This is where we came up with auto unseal. So a lot of our customers were saying, hey, we need to be able to have Vault automatically come up if there's like a power outage or some kind of data center interruption. We're a big enterprise and we can't call people up in the middle of the night that are all over the world to provide their unsealed keys. And so we said, okay, how do we protect this? And so we came up with this mechanism of being able to have the root of trust, have the key that decrypts a key ring, be something that can be protected by an HSM. That was also our first enterprise feature. Now, of course, everything, we have many auto unseal methods, and most of that's in open source. Replicating. So we came up with the first version of replication in year two. That was performance replication, which allows you to essentially have globally distributed clusters where the secrets replicate around, and you have, you can query your local Vault for most actions. We added, later on, we would add, disaster recovery replication and some other things. And finally, identity, right? Everyone has identity already. They're using Okta or, OneLogin, or they're using LDAP, right? People have the notions of identity, and they said, we need Vault to reflect this. So we started adding our identity system, and that's been a very important part of things that came later. Year three was about governance. So we started out with control groups. If you are familiar with GDPR, we took the terminology for this feature directly from GDPR. And it's about multi-authorization. So being able to have one person attempt to perform an action, get approvals from other people, and then have them authorize that action via multiple steps. So that was a big part of the governance story. And identity became a big part of that. That's why it was something that we had to do early to serve as the foundation for these things. Sentinel, if you're familiar with Sentinel and a lot of our products, we have full support for Sentinel policies. And replication mount filtering. And this is used all over. So people will say, okay, we have all of our primary data lives here, but because of various laws in various districts, we cannot have this data replicate, this specific data replicate over there. We cannot have this other data replicate over there. And so they use mount filtering to ensure that only the right data goes to the right places. So year 3 was in large part about governance. In year 4, we basically said, okay, we're going to look at the basics. We're going to look at scaling. We're going to look at governance. And we're going to do more. So things like batch tokens, which allow ephemeral tokens that don't require any storage and have a fixed lifetime. That's used for things like Lambda. You can do that at scale. Agent auto unseal. So this is, it should be agent auto op. Messed that up. Anyway, agent auto auth. So that's the ability to bake Vault Agent into your AMI or bake it into a container or something and have it automatically get a token for you and provide it to your application, keep it renewed, re-authenticate as necessary. Performance standbys, agent caching. This is in the scaling part. So we have things like performance standbys where your HA nodes can suddenly act as read replicas locally. And so for certain operations, things like reading KV values or using transit, then you can basically just add nodes in your data center in the same data center and it just scales linearly. Agent caching. So you can actually use the agent to prevent you from having to get more tokens or more database leases. You just query the agent whenever you need it and it gives you one that's already valid or gets a new one if it's not. On the governance side, things like namespaces, so the ability to essentially section off parts of Vault and parts of Vault's API, where each namespace can have its own policies and its own mounts and so on. And we had a lot of requests for SSO, and so we built in OIDC auth with the full kind of redirect flow capabilities. So the question is, what now? And give me just a moment. I'm just going to grab. I was told there's water there. There is water there, but I'm not going to put a glass down. Not going to do that. Anyways, so the question is what now? So to better understand where we're going, I want to talk about, based on what's happened here, how along that journey in terms of not just features, but kind of how we think about Vault, how that's changed. So Vault started off as a collection of functions, right? So things like store this, track a lifetime of that. Someone would say, oh, we need to sign now, not just encrypt as a service. We need signing as a service. And we would say, okay, we can build that in, right? That's a function that we can build in. But where we've been going is a collection of services. So Vault now isn't just, I can add signing as a service to transit. It is the fact that I can run transit or, have a whole plugin system. Thank you. Or have a whole plugin system that, can run whatever you want. It's things like identity, right? Identity is a system that then powers a bunch of things in Vault. It's things like the replication system that powers lots and lots of things in Vault. So it's moved to a collection of services that are internal and provided to all of these different plugins and all these different backends. And so as a result, we've gone from thinking of Vault as a tool, right? A tool is something that you can, you just say, all right, now this tool does this other thing. Here's an extra flag. If you're running a Unix utility, I've added another flag and it's a tool and it still does what that tool does, but now this flag allows you to, tweak things slightly. And it's gone more towards a platform, right? And the way that I like to think of it is tools perform functions, platforms provide services, right? So Vault at this point isn't just providing functions, it's providing services. And a really good way to think about this is transit, that signing as a service, encrypted as a service that I mentioned. So, if you, transit is basically a set of functions that lives in a plugin, right? Lives in a Vault plugin. But the thing that powers a plugin and gives it the ability to scale and gives it the ability to, have authorization, authentication, all those kinds of things is Vault's core and the services that we've built into Vault's core. So the way that we really think about Vault internally right now is it is authenticating, right? You have to authenticate to Vault to use it. You get Vault tokens. It's authorizing. You get policies. We have RBAC. We have Sentinel. Auditing, right? We have an auditing system that can output to syslog or output to file. Distributed, right? We can distribute it out across geographic regions with replication. Scaling, it scales quite well at this point. Like most of the functions that are there can scale to tens of thousands of requests per second within a data center, and you can just keep kind of adding more nodes for a lot of the functions. And extensible platform. We have a plugin system. That plugin system uses the same API that we use for all of our internal backends that are shipped with Vault. Same exact thing. It's just over a gRPC connection. So we think of it as a platform. And as a platform, it provides security services that are multi-cloud, right? So you can run this in AWS, you can run it in GCP, Azure, wherever you want to run it. And we support things like auto-authentication for all of these clouds. We support authenticating to Vault with all of these clouds. Multi-platform, right? So you can use Vault to power secrets and power security services for your VMs. You can use it for your containers. You can use it for your Lambda functions. Any of these things are possible with Vault. It's multi-service, right? We have different permission sets that can be used to give different things to different services. You want to give the ability to access this encryption key to that database, great. You want to give this ability to access a different encryption key to some other database or some other service, great. You have full control. And it does this with same functionality and same API. And the reason I call that out is I get asked a lot these days about AWS Secrets Manager. And people say, what about AWS Secrets Manager? What does Vault do that's different? And there are some similarities between what they do in terms of minting credentials, rotating credentials, things like that. But Vault does this without relying on AWS. You don't have to be in AWS. And so if you are in a multi-cloud environment, which most of our customers are, then you have the same functionality, same API with Vault. You're just going across different clouds, right? When you deploy your applications across those clouds, they act the same, they behave the same, they call the same functions. All right. So now I'm going to talk about 1.2. So we see the 1.2 release as a microcosm of everything that I was saying here. And I'm going to kind of walk through that a bit and talk about the new features. But what's coming in the 1.2 release, we think it really shows how Vault has become a platform that interoperates with a very wide world of security technologies, right? So we have different eras and approaches that are represented in this release, legacy and modern. We're interoperating with new things from 25 years ago and things that are as recent as 5 years ago, and stuff that's coming out in the future. These are functions that are used by enterprise, they're used by education, they're used by everybody else. And they're across clouds and on-prem. So, with just kind of the subset of things that are coming out in this next release, we're spanning all of these gaps. And so, Vault is really this I think really shows how we think of it as a platform, and why we think of it as a platform is because it is something that we can build whatever other interop we want on top of. So, and along that way, you get the same authn, the same authz, the same scaling, same replication, et cetera. You just, mount your plugins and you go. So in 1.2, we have some new authentication methods. One of those is Kerberos, which is being upstreamed to us by a company named Winton. They're a company in the UK, I believe, that does investment management. So thanks, Winton. And I need to put one little asterisk on here. So because of the way this is getting upstreamed, where this was developed by a company, that company's lawyers have been wanting to talk to our lawyers, and the lawyers are still talking. And we are pretty confident that this can get rolled out by the time that 1.2 final comes out. I feel pretty good about that. But if it doesn't make it into 1.2, it should be sometime very soon after. They're just sort of, it comes down to indemnification. We're giving you our code, what are you warranting against, all that kind of stuff that's in all the click-through stuff that nobody reads except lawyers. The lawyers really care about. So it's being worked on, so it may not end up in 1.2, although I'm optimistic. But it'll come pretty soon after. It's basically feature complete. So Kerberos allows you to use a Spinego, which is HTTP header-based authentication, to use Kerberos to authenticate to Vault. And it does LDAP lookup for mapping to user and group policies. So this is super cool. I mean, this is something that Kerberos has been around for a very long time. It's still in use by lots of educational institutions for using Active Directory that's built on Kerberos. My former employer Akamai used Kerberos all over the place. It's used everywhere. So it's really cool that we are now being able to interoperate with it, even though it's this very old technology. Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So spanning kind of the era from old to new. PCF is much newer, but we also are now able to authenticate with it. We're using a new feature that they've baked in called App and Container Identity Assurance, which is a fancy way of saying they create TLS certificates for you, and then put it on your put it in your app, and then you can access it. And so we have fairly strict tolerances for timing. So we make sure that this is an application that was just started up, and we allow binding policies by application IDs, organization IDs, space IDs. So you can say, I want to make sure, if it's this application ID, give it this set of permissions in Vault. If it's this space ID, give it this other set. It's pretty flexible. So we have a new PCF auth method. Databases. Obviously, we've been supporting various things in databases for a long time. But in 1.2, we have two new features that sort of show bridging that gap between legacy and modern. So this isn't yet supported for all of our databases, but we're working on it. It's supported for, I think, 2 of them at the moment. So this is credential rotation of existing accounts. So a lot of users have come to us and said, hey, so here's the problem. We want to get to the zero trust model where everybody has their own username and password for our databases. We aren't there yet. We have a lot of applications that rely on a very specific user, but they're okay being passed in the password. And so what we can do is we can say, all right, we'll take on that user. We'll rotate the password for you on an interval, and authorized applications can query for the current password whenever they want. So existing account credential rotation, Vault becomes a source of truth. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention that I do want to mention here is all these things I'm talking about in 1.2, these were all derived directly from user requests and requests from enterprises. So everything that you're seeing here, these are all because the community came to us and said, we really need these things, and we said, great, let's do it. So I'm pretty happy about that. Elasticsearch. So we're also generating credentials for Elasticsearch in 1.2, which is great. Widely used database. Many of you probably know it. And so we just added support for this in our database backend. So again, sort of bridging old and new kind of approaches. Key Management Interoperability Protocol, or as it's commonly known, KIMP. Can I just get a show of hands, people that have heard of this? Like 4 or 5. Maybe 6. Cool. This is one of those things that, like, if it means nothing to you, then it means nothing to you. And if you know what this means, it means everything. Because this is one of those things that it's a standard. It's basically a PKCS 11 successor. Oh, how many people have heard of PKCS 11? More? Okay, way more. Okay, all right. Take PKCS 11, right? Remove the requirement to bind against a C library, and instead say we're going to make this network capable. And that's basically KMIP, right? So it's basically networked KMIP where instead of defining the C interface, it defines encoding and decoding. So you see a lot of support for it with certain types of databases, and a bunch of products can interoperate within it. It's growing in adoption. I will say the PKCS 11 people would not like that first bullet point because they are still working on a PKCS 11 version 3.0, even though KMIP is now working on version 2.0 of it. So now you have basically competing standards that are both owned by Oasis, and that's fun. But anyways, we went with KMIP because we don't really want to write a C library. So it defines standard encoding and protocol for carrying out security cryptographic related operations. So it has about 40 different functions, and it's centered around this concept called manage objects, which is basically like a key. So I want to create a key, I want to fetch the key, I want to add attributes to the key, delete the key, revoke the key, etc. So if you look elsewhere, then you'll see the standalone product that often retails for millions of dollars USD and then has licensing in the thousands per client. And so we've been talking to some of our customers that are really into this idea of us supporting KMIP, and they've said, yeah, we've been wanting to go to KMIP because we have a lot of things that can support it, but the servers are literally out of our price range. Like, we're already paying for Vault, and they want us for just this one piece of functionality. They want to charge us millions of dollars for like a high availability setup, and then we have to then additionally on top of charge thousands per client, and we just cannot afford that. In Vault, we implemented the protocol, and we added a secret engine, right? And I think that this here is really one of those like power of the platform kind of things that I was talking about before, where we built this platform that like replicates and authenticates. The KMIP authentication is a little bit different, but you control it through Vault's API and through the authenticated authorized API. And when you do this, it replicates to all of your Vault clusters if you're using replication, right? The secrets and the objects. In KMIP, we support scopes, which are basically like enclaves of keys. So you can, within the same mount, you can say, I want to create a scope called this and a scope called that. And then in those scopes, you have roles that convey permission sets. So you can say, this client is allowed to create keys but not delete them. That client is allowed to find keys or list attributes but not fetch them. So it's pretty flexible. It's early days. We'll enhance it over time. In talking to people about this, then people have said, oh, so you do encryption with KMIP. And I said, no, we don't do encryption with KMIP. They're like, oh, I thought that you were implementing this. And here's the thing. Most of the users of KMIP that we've been interoperating with and that we've been addressing and that we've been talking to are using MySQL Enterprise, MongoDB Enterprise, VMware vCenter. Like, those are the 3 initial use cases we're targeting. And those just fetch keys. They fetch keys and they do the encryption locally. They don't need to encrypt. So instead of going through the encryption stuff, we said, okay, we're going to make it so you can query keys, list them, encrypt, fetch them, and et cetera. So it's very much driven by requirements coming from our users, our customers. And we're going to enhance this over time as more requirements come in. The other thing I'll say about this is the one piece of functionality out of everything I'm talking about here that is enterprise only. Everything else that I'm talking about here is open source. OIDC. Show of hands for OIDC. Should be probably everyone. Yeah, pretty much. All right, so we've had a long history of doing things with JOTs and OIDC in Vault. In 0.8.3, we added Kerberos service principal auth. So you could be on a Kerberos machine, and you could take your service principal token and send it to Vault, and we can authenticate you. In 0.10.4, we added support for kind of arbitrary JOTs. You can say, here's the signing key, and I want to authenticate this, and you check on claims for roles and all that. We then added support for that and Kubernetes and agent auto-auth. Got it right on that bullet point, not auto and seal. 1.0, Kubernetes projected account auth, which is kind of a newer way of doing it. And then finally 1.1.0, OIDC redirect flow SSO support. So you could actually go to the Vault UI, you could redirect to Okta or wherever else you're using for your identity provider, and then come back and be authenticated to Vault. In 1.2, we're adding something called OIDC identity tokens. So this is the ability to mint OIDC tokens within Vault, right? So what you can do is you can say, here, I have this identity information that's coming from my metadata or from the authentication provider's metadata, and I want to create OIDC tokens that include this information. I want to be able to use it for whatever. So you could use it for downstream auth. And one of the big drivers here for why we did this is we would get a lot of people coming to us and saying, we want to use Vault, like we trust Vault. We want to use it as the thing for one app to authenticate to another app. But we can't figure out a way to do it decently with Vault tokens. And so I've seen a whole bunch of different ways that people have tried to do this, where they would say, I'm going to take a Vault token, and I'm going to take a blank policy, and I'm going to attach this blank policy to that token, and then I give it to another application, and they say, okay, does it have this particular policy attached? And if so, then it's authenticated, but you have to make it a blank policy because you don't want them to actually be able to use that token for anything, and it becomes this big mess. So for a long time we thought about, okay, how can we fix this? And we decided to leverage what we've been doing with authenticating and identity and build in the way to pull out OIDC tokens. So we support multiple keys, and if you're using namespaces, we support multiple keys per namespace. We eventually want to enable some global keys that you can actually say, for all of my Vault installs across all my namespaces, I want to be able to reference these global keys, but that's not in 1.2. And we have roles that use keys and define scopes. Really, I should probably have said claims here if you're familiar with it, but static and templated. So what do I mean by static and templated? So here's an example. So you can see the country claim up there is static, right? It is always going to be NL if you're pulling things out of this. But for user info, we're using identity information. So the username is coming indirectly from the authentication provider. It's coming from an entity alias. And then the groups are whatever groups I've been assigned to within Vault. And then there's also some other extra things you can do, like time.now. So not before is time.now. And then that turns into when we actually go and we go through the template, the country is still the same, the time has been filled in, and the user info has been filled in with the name and the associated groups. And we support two types of verification. The first is the standard .well-known endpoints, and the other is an introspection endpoint, kind of what Kubernetes provides, which also validates that the entity that's associated with it hasn't been disabled. So there are some claims that we always put in, like we always put in what namespace it's associated with. I believe we always put in what entity it's associated with, and so that way you can say, has someone disabled this entity in the interim time? Dynamic UI. This is really, really cool. What this is, in 1.0, we added the ability to generate open API schemas on the fly. And this is actually something that you can, in 1.2, you can actually pull this out. You can do a path help command and put the format in JSON, and what it will return is actually open API. But we have ways of basically pulling out open API from your entire collection of Vault, all of the mounts that are there, all the engines that are mounted, all the plugins, and basically give you a full schema. And so what we're doing is we're using this in 1.2. We're starting to use this to create the forms in the UI. Why is this cool? This is cool because what this means is not only does it mean that we can, as we change parameters in Vault's code, then it updates those parameters. If we change a parameter description, for instance, it just automatically updates within the UI. But it also means that when you're writing your own plugins, eventually your plugins will be supported in the UI without us having to code anything. So your custom plugins will just be usable within Vault's UI. This is super cool. The only thing that's currently fully dynamic is LDAP auth. But that was sort of the canary in the coal mine, and the rest are going to be coming over time, over the next few releases. This is a mouthful. I didn't have a better name for it because we've just been calling it TokenUtil because it's a helper. It's a helper library that we wrote called TokenUtil. So I didn't have a better name for this. But what this means, in 1.2, all token parameters are the same across all auth methods with full backwards compatibility. So prior to 1.2, if you were configuring an auth method to get a vault token, then some of them would say, you have maybe TTL and period and bound CIDRs that you could bind IPs to. And you would maybe have that for some, and then this other method wouldn't support periodic tokens, and this other method wouldn't support batch tokens, or whatever you have. It's basically, it was sort of wherever people said we need this support in this auth method, we just would add it to that auth method, and it was a one-off thing. In 1.2, we've actually turned all of these fields, we've pulled all this functionality into a helper, and then we've seeded that helper through every single one of the auth methods. And so there's consistent names for the parameters, consistent descriptions, consistent behavior for how they act. There are a few exceptions where there have to be, so things like if you're using Centrify authentication, it doesn't support renewability because the way that the Centrify stuff works doesn't. So that isn't renewable, so you won't, there are certain things that out of necessity are different for particular auth methods, but where there isn't a particular reason, they are all now working exactly the same way. And so as I said, it brings more functionality to many auth methods. Tech preview. This is tech preview status for a couple reasons, but built-in HA storage, and I'll talk about the tech preview status. This is using our Raft library. It's the same Raft library that powers Console and Nomad. So we're using Raft directly within Vault. It's not memory bound. One of the things that people have had troubles with is as they add more and more and more to Vault, they often don't realize that Console's working set is stored in memory. So the more data you add to Vault, if you're using Console as a backend, which is what we support in Vault Enterprise, then your Console memory usage grows, and sometimes people don't realize that, and they put a lot of data in, and then Console goes down, and then Vault goes down. So we've wanted to solve this for a while, but it's been a tough thing to do. But now in 1.2 in Tech Preview, we have the ability to have this transactional and HA storage built directly in. It works the same way that you're accustomed to with Console and Nomad, but it doesn't require them. So it supports HA and replication. The reason it's Tech Preview is for two reasons. It's not because it doesn't work. It's because there are a couple of things. We want to add a recovery mode so that if something goes wrong, you can still unseal enough of Vault to be able to perform operations on the Raft library or on kind of the quorum stuff. So we want to support the ability to have some kind of recovery stuff in case things go south. And we just didn't have time to put that in. The other is that there's no production sort of testing of this yet, right? So it has not been out there. It's not been getting tested by the broader community. It's only being tested by us and by our unit tests and our integration tests. And so we want to put it out there, let people put it in their dev clusters, let people play around with it, report bugs to us. So we just didn't really feel ready saying, hey, go use this, right? Go migrate all of your storage to this yet. We expect it to be ready by 1.3. There we might go from tech preview to beta, just depending on how much feedback we've gotten. But 1.3 or 1.4 is when we'll say we think this is ready for ready to go. All right. So we're excited, right? We're excited about this release. We're excited about where Vault has come. I think that this sort of broad capability, outside of the sort of dynamic UI and Raft stuff, like all of these capabilities that we've added are being built on this same interface. You get all these different systems, services that we've built into the platform, and hopefully I've sort of kind of made it clear why internally we think of it as a platform rather than a tool. It's just come a long way in the last 4 years, and it's sort of stopped being the thing that just does some encryption or the thing that just does some storage of KV. What's next? All right. I can't talk about this. And I know probably a lot of you were hoping that I could. And there's a couple reasons for this. So we have major new features planned. We have really cool stuff we have planned. We also have a lot of major upgrades to some of the Vault subsystems. The problem that we have right now is that the timing is a bit in flux. The reason the timing is in flux is that there are some features that just require some lawyers to do some due diligence on things, which is nothing scary. It's just something that we have to do as a company. And so we're not sure when that will be done. So that might delay a feature from one release to another. There are some other things that just based on where things land, we might have to shift stuff around. So we can't really say what's coming out yet, and we can't say when it's coming out. So I'm very sorry about that, but what I can tell you is we continue to listen to the community, we continue to listen to our users, both open source and enterprise, and we have heard you loud and clear on a number of big asks that you've all been making, and we have some very big plans in store. In kind of a less sort of broad way, I would expect that 1.3 is going to be, the way that we're thinking about this internally is going to be somewhat of a stabilization release while we sort of build out some bigger features for 1.4 and 1.5. But we also want to make sure that, after all the big pushes of these features that are coming in 1.2, we want to make sure that we have plenty of time on our roadmap to dedicate to, improving Raft, adding more features to KMIP, fixing bugs that have been reported, all that kind of stuff. And so, I think that 1.3 is likely to be just make everything better that is there, more than fancy new features, and mostly new features will be coming in 1.4, 1.5. So I think a lot of you will appreciate that. Some of you were maybe hoping for something big and splashy coming in 1.3, but at this point in time, I'm thinking it's going to be more stabilization than anything else. Stuff. So that's it. Thanks for letting me ramble at you for a while about Vault and about what's coming in the near term, where we're going, kind of, and how we got here. Like I said, so Vault is just over 4 years old. I've been working on Vault for just under 4 years, and it's been a great ride. And I do want to say that we really, really appreciate the community. The community has helped really build Vault into what it is, both by telling us what we need to do. What do we need to build in Vault? What do we need to, what are the systems? What are the services? What are the functions? And also just, community is great, honestly. Like, good feedback, good people. They help each other out, and we're super thrilled about it. And I'm super happy with that everyone is a part of this. So, thank you very much. Have a good day.